The X-Files was asking questions about faith and proof and how we know. The truth is out there. Fox Mulder believed in all kinds of unprovable strangeness. Dana Scully only in what she could prove by science. They were both after certainty. He wanted to see and experience unlikely and unexplainable phenomena firsthand. She wanted to disprove it and come up with a reasonable explanation for everything. I was feeling the same way. My Mulder imagination wanted to hold on to my faith in God, and the God that I thought I had known since my youth, but my Scully brain kept throwing the evidence back in my face. So I did what any reasonable person would do in that state of uncertainty. I started a church. Looking back on it, I know it doesn't make any sense, but it seemed to at the time. A lot of people were like me, tired of corporation-style churches with happy, clappy praise songs, easy answers, and 3 steps to a good marriage type sermons that turned the Bible into a book of advice for living the American dream. I know now that this is not a fair characterization of the church that I came from, but it's what I felt like at the time. And in the angst of my late 20s, Mark Driscoll was planning a church at that time and said it was easy and he'd help me come and set up chairs. He was younger than me and he did it, so what was I waiting for? So I started a church called Mercy. We met in a bar to reach out to the lost and ended up attracting rebellious Christians. But it was a great adventure. When we were looking for funding for our fledgling church startup, I talked to lots of people. Having never been in a denomination, I was not that familiar with the distinctives of each. I grew up non-denominational or even anti-denominational. All I knew about denominations I learned from other people in seminary who were complaining about the politics of theirs. I wanted none of it. I took pride in my independence, but now, for financial reasons, I was ready to set that aside and sell my soul to the highest bidder. Well, not really. I was just faced for the first time with having to weigh what I really believed and what I was willing to compromise. The decision to start a church and to be the pastor all of a sudden made me the expert on what we believed. I had to decide where we stood on baptism, women in ministry, church government, eschatology, soteriology, strategy, pneumatology. I was still finishing seminary. My mom had just died. I wasn't exactly sure what I believed. One of the sources that we looked to for help was the newly forming Acts 29 church planting network. A pastor from Boca Raton, Florida, had given Mark Driscoll a bunch of money to start his church, and Mark told me to give him a call. When I did, he told me he wanted to help young church planters, but he wanted to make sure they planted good Reformed churches with none of that Arminian or dispensational crap. Now, I thought I knew what these words meant, but I wasn't quite sure what he was so fired up about. So I asked J.P. Jones, who taught at Biola, a dispensational school in our area, and J.P. said, "Oh, you're an Arminian." And that scared me, because in my house growing up, that was the theological equivalent of being a communist, or for those of you who don't remember the Reagan era, a terrorist. I knew I didn't want to be that, but I realized that even though I was graduating from seminary, I didn't really understand where I stood, what I believed, or what team I was on. So I stepped up my quest after certainty. Meanwhile, my courtship with the Evangelical Covenant Church was leading me to investigate the Lutheran and Pietist roots of that movement. But it was the Covenant's acceptance of infant baptism that led me to an issue of R.C. Sproul's Table Talk magazine, and it was there I was introduced to certainty. R.C. Sproul and Reformed people in general are certain and clear. I was attracted to that. Mike Horton's book, Putting Amazing Back into Grace, convinced me that there was a right and historic way to interpret the scripture and understand God. The names of all the heavies of church history that began to stack up on the side of the Reformed camp convinced me that I wanted to be on their team. And now I knew why David Nicholas from Boca Raton was so passionate about planting good Reformed churches. Because this stuff matters. I was certain. And it was so good to be certain about my faith and to have answers to every question. I no longer had to piece answers together off the top of my head. They had been settled over 400 years earlier. I just had to memorize them in the catechisms and the confessions. Of course, I had to reasonably defend them, but that was easy to do because they really held together well within the logic of the system. This was a welcome break for my otherwise unfettered, free-thinking mind. It was like a strange comfort and safety a wild stallion must feel in a corral. I had room to run and graze, but not wander off. This theological fence kept me safe, and it helped me know where I stood. So I read the Puritans, the Reformers, and every book by R.C. Sproul, Mike Horton, Doug Wilson, and John Piper. I listened to sermon tapes and every series by Reformed teachers that I could find. I immersed myself in back issues of Modern Reformation and Table Talk magazines. I was so hungry to learn, and I felt I had finally found the certain truth. I noticed differences among the perspectives I was reading, but I longed for even more certainty. I wanted to pick the team that had it really figured out. Meanwhile, my theological quest made for an interesting ride for my newly planted church. Actually, it never really got planted. It was more of a potted plant, changing pots too often to ever be rooted in one place. The physical and theological moving eventually led to the decline and dissolution of the church that I had loved and led somewhat erratically over the 4.5 years of its life. When we finally closed the church, I went back to school full time. I wanted to get fully re-educated in the best Reformed tradition, so I went to Westminster Seminary in Escondido, California. And it was there that I had hoped to finally find the certainty I was after. I was so excited to learn and study full time. I could learn Greek and Hebrew and theology and philosophy and how to really study the Bible to know exactly what it means. I could find a denomination to be ordained in where everyone agreed about what they believed. Little did I know that what I would actually find would be the undoing of my certainty.